On my wedding day, my perfect fairy tale turned into a living nightmare. Just as I was about to say I do, Emma, my husband's ex-girlfriend, burst through the chapel doors, tears streaming down her face. "Stop this wedding!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the silent church. "I'm pregnant with David's baby." My heart stopped. 200 guests gasped in unison. I turned to look at David, searching his face for any sign that this was just a cruel joke, but the color had drained from his face, and his hands were trembling. That's when I knew. My dream wedding was about to become my worst nightmare. I'm Rachel, and I never imagined my wedding day would change my life in ways I never expected. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs. But love has a way of blinding us to the truth, doesn't it? 3 months earlier, David and I were planning what should have been the happiest day of our lives. We chose a beautiful historic church in downtown Chicago, with stained glass windows that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. I spent countless hours picking out the perfect dress, a flowing white gown with delicate lace that made me feel like a princess. "You look stunning," my best friend Sarah had said during the final fitting. "David won't know what hit him." If only I had known then that something else entirely would hit us all on that fateful day. The morning of the wedding started perfectly. The autumn sun painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges as my bridesmaids helped me get ready in the church's bridal suite. Sarah carefully pinned my grandmother's vintage pearl hairpiece into my updo while my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "My beautiful girl," Mom whispered, squeezing my hand. "Your father would have been so proud to walk you down the aisle today." Dad had passed away 2 years ago, and his absence left an ache in my heart that even my happiness couldn't fill. Everything was going according to plan. The flowers arrived on time, white roses and lilies filling the church with their sweet scent. The string quartet played softly as guests filed in, dressed in their finest. David's mother, Patricia, stopped by the bridal suite to give me a quick hug, though something felt off about her smile. "You'll do just fine, dear," she said, patting my cheek. Now I wonder if she knew what was coming. As I stood at the back of the church, clutching my bouquet, my Uncle James, who had stepped in to walk me down the aisle, gave my arm a reassuring squeeze. "Ready, sweetheart?" he asked. I nodded, my heart fluttering with excitement. The wedding march began to play, and the large wooden doors opened. David stood at the altar, handsome in his black tuxedo, beaming at me with what I thought was love in his eyes. Each step down the aisle felt magical, like walking on clouds. Our guests smiled and whispered as I passed, and I felt like the luckiest woman alive. The minister began the ceremony, his voice warm and gentle as he spoke about love, trust, and commitment. David held my hands in his, and they felt warm and steady. I looked into his eyes, seeing our future together, the house we'd buy, the children we'd have, the life we'd build. "If anyone has the reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony," the minister's voice rang out, "speak now, or forever hold your peace." That's when the church doors slammed open, and there stood Emma, mascara running down her face, her hair wild, wearing a simple sundress that couldn't hide the slight curve of her stomach. The same Emma who had dated David for 5 years before me. The same Emma who had supposedly moved to California for a fresh start. "I'm pregnant," she screamed again, her voice breaking. "Tell them, David. Tell them about last month." In that moment, time seemed to stop. 200 faces turned to look at me, waiting to see what I would do. But it was what happened next that truly shattered my world. David's mother was the first to break the shocked silence. "I knew it!" Patricia shrieked, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I knew she wasn't good enough for you, David!" She rushed to Emma's side, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. The same woman who had smiled at me in the bridal suite just minutes ago was now showing her true colors. I felt my knees go weak, but Sarah appeared beside me instantly, holding me steady. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the church like wildfire. I could see phones being pulled out, people recording my humiliation. This wasn't just my wedding anymore. It was becoming a viral scandal in real time. "David?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Tell me this isn't true." He wouldn't look at me. His hands, which had held mine so confidently moments ago, now hung limply at his sides. The silence from him was worse than any words could have been. "Last month," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger, When you told Rachel you were on that business trip to New York? She paused, letting the implications sink in. He was with me in Milwaukee. We never stopped seeing each other, Rachel. Never. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. Milwaukee. That's where his company's second office was located. How many business trips had been visits to Emma? How long had this been going on? You were with me last night too, Emma added, her words like poison darts. Tell them, David. Tell them where you were during your bachelor party. The string quartet had stopped playing. The afternoon sun streaming through the stained glass windows now felt harsh and exposing, highlighting every tear on my face and every tremor in my hands. I looked at David again, silently begging him to deny it all, to say something, anything, to prove this was just a horrible mistake. Finally, he turned to face me. But instead of the guilt or remorse I expected to see, his expression had hardened into something I didn't recognize. I never meant for this to happen, he said coldly. But Emma's right. We never really ended things. The church erupted in chaos. My bridesmaids surged forward protectively while David's groomsmen stepped back, distancing themselves from their friend's betrayal. Patricia was still holding Emma, both of them watching me with a mixture of triumph and pity that made my stomach turn. 3 years, I said, my voice growing stronger with anger. 3 years of my life, David. Was any of it real? He dared to shrug. I thought I could love you more than her. I tried. But Emma and we have history. And now, with the baby? I didn't let him finish. The bouquet of white roses he had insisted on despite my preference for lilies, fell from my hands. 3 years of memories flashed through my mind. Our first date at the Navy Pier, the key to his apartment tied with a red ribbon on my birthday, and the proposal in front of my entire family at Christmas. All lies. You know what's funny? I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice had become. I always wondered why you kept that photo of you and Emma on your office desk. You said it was just because it was a good picture of the whole friend group. But it was never about the group, was it? The silence that followed was deafening. Even Emma looked surprised. Perhaps she hadn't known about the photo. Good. Let them both squirm. Sarah squeezed my arm. Rachel, honey, let's get out of here. You don't need this. But I wasn't finished. I turned to address our guests, my voice clear and strong despite the tears still rolling down my cheeks. Thank you all for coming to what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, you've witnessed something else entirely. The moment I discovered who David really is. Please enjoy the reception without us. The food is already paid for after all. Then I turned back to David, Emma, and Patricia. The 3 of you deserve each other. I hope you'll be very happy together. Why don't we start with just the numbers, I asked, and see if you agree. With those words, I gathered my dress and walked back down the aisle, head held high. This time, instead of wedding music, the sound of murmuring voices and shocked gasps accompanied my exit. Sarah and my other bridesmaids followed close behind, a protective guard of honor in varying shades of blue silk. As I pushed open the heavy church doors, stepping into the bright Chicago afternoon, I heard David call my name. Rachel, wait! I didn't turn around. I didn't need to, because in that moment I realized something important. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. The next few hours passed in a blur. Sarah drove me to her apartment, my massive wedding dress taking up most of her car's back seat. I sat in silence, staring at my engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond that probably came with its own web of lies. Everything I thought I knew about my life had been a carefully crafted illusion. I'm ordering pizza and opening wine, Sarah announced as we entered her apartment. And then we're going to figure out how to make them pay. I looked up, surprised by the steel in her voice. Sweet, gentle Sarah, who worked as a kindergarten teacher and rescued stray cats, was ready for war. That's when my phone started exploding with notifications. Oh my God, I whispered, staring at my screen. Someone had posted the video of Emma's dramatic entrance on TikTok. It already had thousands of views. Wedding drama was trending locally. I'm going viral. Sarah grabbed my phone. Nope, no social media for you right now. She paused, then added with a sly smile. Although, this could actually work in our favor. That's when my mother called. Rachel, honey, there's something you need to know, she said, her voice shaking. I just overheard Patricia talking to Emma at the reception. This wasn't just about the affair. I put the phone on speaker as Mom continued. They were talking about David's company, about how he and Emma had been moving money around, something about fake accounts and investor fraud. Patricia's been helping them hide it. Sarah and I exchanged looks. This was bigger than a cheating fiancé. This was criminal. Remember Linda from my book club? Mom added. Her daughter works for the SEC. Should I make a call? For the first time since Emma burst into the church, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. Yes, Mom. Make that call. Over the next few days, a plan began to take shape. While David bombarded me with texts, alternating between angry accusations and desperate apologies, I started gathering evidence. It turned out that being the almost wife of a financial fraudster had its advantages. I had passwords, documents, and access to accounts he'd forgotten about. Look at this, Sarah said one evening, pointing to her laptop screen. She'd been helping me go through years of financial records. Every time David had a business trip to Milwaukee, there were large transfers to offshore accounts. And guess who else was traveling to Milwaukee those same weekends? Patricia, I answered, remembering how David's mother always seemed to know his schedule. They were all in on it together. The viral video of my ruined wedding had an unexpected benefit. It brought other victims forward. Former employees of David's company started reaching out, sharing stories of suspicious activities they'd witnessed. Each piece of information was another nail in their coffin. I dropped my eyes to the floor and resolved to abandon any pretense of normalcy. A week after what should have been my honeymoon, I sat in a downtown Chicago office with Agent Karen Chen from the SEC. She looked through the evidence we'd gathered, her expression growing more serious with each document. Mrs. Mitchell, she said, using my maiden name. I'd never been so grateful not to have changed it. This is extensive. We're talking about millions in investor fraud, tax evasion, and multiple counts of financial misconduct. How long have you been gathering this information? I thought about all those nights I'd stayed up planning the wedding while documenting every inconsistency I'd noticed in David's business. Even then, some part of me must have known something wasn't right. Let's just say I've always been good with details, I replied. And now I want justice, not just for me, but for everyone they've hurt. Agent Chen nodded approvingly. We'll need you to work with us. This could take time. Time is something I have plenty of, I said. I did cancel my honeymoon, after all. That evening, as Sarah and I sat on her balcony watching the sunset over Lake Michigan, she asked me if I was scared. Not anymore, I answered honestly. You know what the worst part is? They thought I was weak. David, Emma, Patricia, they all thought I would just fall apart. They never expected me to fight back. Sarah clinked her wineglass against mine. Well, they're about to learn a very expensive lesson. I smiled, thinking about the meeting I had scheduled for tomorrow with a top fraud investigator. David and his conspirators thought they'd ruined my life that day in the church. Instead, they'd given me a new purpose. The foundation of their carefully constructed house of lies was about to crumble, and I would be there to watch it fall. 2 months after my failed wedding, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my black blazer. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same bride who'd been humiliated in that church. She was stronger, sharper, and ready for war. Today was the annual investor meeting at David's company, and I had a special presentation planned. Are you ready? Sarah asked, handing me my laptop bag. The SEC agents are already in position. I nodded, checking my phone one last time. The group chat with former employees was buzzing with updates. Everyone was in place. It's funny, I said, how David never realized that his assistant Janet had been documenting everything for years. All she needed was someone to listen. The company's lobby was packed when we arrived. David had always made these investor meetings into grand events, expensive catering, promotional videos, the works. Today would be no different except for one small detail. I had the real numbers, and I was about to share them with everyone. I spotted Emma near the entrance, her baby bump now visible under her designer dress. She was clinging to David's arm like a trophy, while Patricia worked the room, charming potential investors. The perfect family picture. Too bad it was about to shatter. Rachel? David's voice cracked when he saw me. What are you doing here? I smiled sweetly. Oh, didn't you get the memo? I'm doing a special presentation today. About financial transparency. The color drained from his face. Behind him, I saw Patricia freeze mid-conversation. You can't, he hissed, grabbing my arm. You're not authorized. Actually, I interrupted, pulling away. The SEC authorized me just fine. And look, here they come now. Agent Chen and her team entered through the main doors, right on schedule. The room fell silent as they made their way through the crowd. Emma's perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat, while Patricia's social smile crumbled. I walked to the podium, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the now silent room. Behind me, the presentation screen lit up. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady. "My name is Rachel Mitchell. 2 months ago, I was supposed to marry David Anderson. Instead, I discovered something far more interesting than his affair with his pregnant ex-girlfriend." Whispers rippled through the crowd. I clicked to the first slide, a simple spreadsheet that told a devastating story. For the past 5 years, David Anderson, Patricia Anderson, and Emma Collins have been running an elaborate fraud scheme. They've been siphoning investor funds through a network of fake accounts, primarily through their Milwaukee office. The total amount? I paused for effect. $17 million. The room erupted in chaos. David lunged for the podium, but 2 SEC agents blocked his path. Patricia dashed for the exit, only to find more agents waiting. Emma just stood there, tears streaming down her face. Real ones this time. "We have testimonies from 15 former employees," I continued over the commotion. "Bank records, transfer histories, even recordings of conversations about where to hide the money. Would anyone like to see those first?" The crowd began to chant. Both Lorenzo and I spoke into our law roots. "You bitch!" Patricia screamed as an agent cuffed her hands behind her back. "You've ruined everything!" I looked her straight in the eye. "No, Patricia. You ruined everything when you helped your son deceive not just me, but hundreds of innocent investors. Remember what you said at my bridal shower? About family being everything? Well, you're about to find out just how strong family ties are in federal prison." The next hour was a blur of arrests, statements, and shocked investors demanding answers. I watched as David, Emma, and Patricia were led away in handcuffs, their perfect facades finally crumbling. Sarah appeared at my side, grinning. "That was better than any wedding could have been." "Almost," I agreed. Then I noticed Janet, David's former assistant, giving me a thumbs up from across the room. She'd been instrumental in gathering evidence, tired of covering up their crimes. As reporters began flooding into the lobby, Agent Chen approached me. "Well done, Ms. Mitchell. Ready to make your statement to the press?" I took a deep breath, thinking about all the other people out there who had been betrayed and deceived. Maybe my story could help them find their strength, too. "Actually," I said, stepping toward the waiting cameras, "I have quite a lot to say." The next few days were unlike any other I could remember. The flash of cameras reminded me of my wedding day, but this time, I wasn't a victim in white lace. I was a warrior in a black blazer, and my story was just beginning. 1 year later, I stood at my kitchen window, sipping coffee and watching the Seattle rain. The newspaper on my counter told the story everyone now knew. Financial fraud trio sentenced. David Anderson, mother and ex-girlfriend, face 15 years. The viral video of my ruined wedding had nothing on the media circus their trial became. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah with a link. "Look who's trying to sell her story to Netflix." It was Emma, apparently shopping around a tell-all book from prison. I couldn't help but laugh. Some people never learn. The investigation had uncovered more than just financial fraud. Turned out Emma's pregnancy was part of the scheme too. A fake belly and a planned dramatic entrance, all orchestrated by Patricia to stop the wedding before I could access their financial records as David's wife. They never expected their plan to backfire. So spectacularly. "You should write the real story," my publisher had said last week over lunch. "People want to hear it from you." I glanced at my laptop, where the first chapter was already taking shape. But this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about healing. The doorbell rang. It was Janet, David's former assistant, now my close friend and business partner. We'd started a consulting firm helping companies detect internal fraud. Turns out, my story had struck a nerve in the corporate world. "Ready for our meeting?" she asked, shaking off her umbrella. The CEO of that tech startup is really interested in our services, she said. I nodded, gathering my materials. Our company slogan made me smile every time, because some red flags come in white dresses. Later that evening, I had dinner with my mom and Sarah, who'd both moved to Seattle to be closer to me. The restaurant overlooked Puget Sound, and as the sun set, I thought about how different my life was from what I'd planned. Remember what you said at the trial? Sarah asked, refilling our wine glasses. About how sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the best thing that ever happened to you? I do, I replied, thinking of the moment I'd faced David in court. He'd tried to plead guilty to a lesser charge, claiming he'd done it all for love. The judge hadn't bought it. Your story helped so many people, Mom added. That support group you started for fraud victims has chapters in 3 states now. I smiled, remembering the hundreds of messages I'd received from people sharing their own stories of betrayal and recovery. Sometimes, strength finds you when you're not looking for it. My phone lit up with another notification, a reminder about tomorrow's speaking engagement at a women's leadership conference. The title of my talk was From Bride to Boss, How to Turn Betrayal into Business. You know what's ironic? I said, looking at my mom and Sarah. David always said I was too trusting, too naive. He thought that made me weak. But trust, when it's earned, when it's built on truth, that's the strongest foundation there is. Sarah raised her glass. To trust, truth, and karma in a prison jumpsuit. We laughed, and I felt that familiar warmth of gratitude for these women who'd stood by me through everything. The rain had stopped, and through the restaurant window, I could see stars beginning to appear. I got another letter from Patricia last week, I mentioned. She still wants to explain everything. And? Mom asked. I sent back a copy of their sentencing report. Some things don't need explanation. They just need consequences. As we finished our dinner, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The wedding video that had gone viral was still online, but now it was usually shared as a story of empowerment rather than humiliation. People called me an inspiration, but the truth was simpler. I'd simply refused to let someone else write my story. Walking home that night, I passed a bridal shop. In the window, a white dress caught the light, sparkling like the one I'd worn that day. But I didn't feel any pain looking at it, just gratitude for the path it had led me down. My phone buzzed one last time, an email confirming my vacation plans for next month. A solo trip to Bali, something the old Rachel would never have done. But then again, the old Rachel didn't know her strength. As I unlocked my apartment door, I smiled at the framed headline on my wall. Wedding Day. Whistleblower transforms tragedy into triumph. Below it hung a small piece of lace from my wedding dress. A reminder not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd found. My voice, my power, and most importantly, myself. The end.